Okay, good afternoon and welcome to the webinar. My name is Meg Davis. I'm Special Advisor on Strategy and Partnerships in the Global Health Center of the Graduate Institute in Geneva. And you're joining the third in our 73rd World Health Assembly series of virtual side events. Very excited about this one. This is the first of our side events that was selected through an open applications process. So this year, for the first time, we invited people to submit proposals for events, and we were very excited by the proposal from Saluteglobale.it to discuss political and commercial determinants of type 2 diabetes through the lens of this film, El Susto, The Shock. So please enjoy the webinar, join the conversation on Twitter. It's hashtag WHA Week. And with that, I'm very pleased to welcome Lorenzo Demin, who is one of the founders of Saluteglobale.it. He's an MD from the University of Milan, an MSc from Maastricht, and he teaches and trains health professionals. Thanks so much, Lorenzo, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Meg. Good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, or good evening. We are actually a very large group of people from all over the world, and thank you for being here. I would start immediately by showing the trailer of El Susto, and then I will introduce the member of the panel.
Diabetes is the #1 cause of mortality in Mexico.
I would change the word type 2 diabetes in all medical textbooks to what it really is: processed food disease.
A flood of Coca-Cola went into Mexico.
How much of my product can I get into their stomachs per day?
There's rapid changes in the environment that people are not able to process.
Mothers who were concerned that their children would get dysentery from polluted water fed their babies Coca-Cola.
What they aim for is brand indoctrination.
As soon as they turn 12,
they may drink that product forever.
Yo creo que la diabetes es los sustos.
Susto. It means a shock, a scare.
They're using that to talk about how their lives are being disrupted.
Eventually, the #1 beverage on earth will not be tea or coffee or wine or beer. It will be our soft drinks.
Es hora de ponerles un alto.
There's a fight.
It's causing a domino effect.
Most countries are not doing anything.
Hemos propuesto un impuesto al refresco.
Mexico is different.
And now let me welcome our guest. We are really pleased to have here Karen Atkins, Director of El Susto. Karen is a former activist on safe and active transportation and is an emerging filmmaker. This is her first work as a filmmaker. And Dr. Angela Carriedo. Angela is an expert of food policy. She completed her PhD on the topic of soda tax in Mexico at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, and now works as a consultant. And I've heard that your PhD thesis played an important role in the making of this movie. You may want to tell us more about it later, Angela. And Dr. Simon Barquera is the Director of a Nutrition and Health Research Center at the National Institute of Public Health in Mexico. And his face may look familiar if you have watched the movie. So welcome to all of you. We have an hour and we have a lot of topics to discuss. So I would go straight to the point And I will start with my first question. And my first question is for you, Karen. As I said, El Susto is your first work as a filmmaker. Can you tell us a bit what's the story behind this film and how did you decide to make El Susto?
Thanks, Lorenzo, and thank you very much for having me today and putting on this event. So the backstory of El Susto is that when my kids had gone off to college, it was in 2008, I was sort of an empty nester, and I volunteered to go on a medical mission to Mexico with a group of nurses. They were mostly diabetes educators. And they had been doing this for many years, to go to Mexico for a month to the Yucatan. Diabetes. So I went down there for a month the first time, and what I saw was very shocking. We were testing all kinds of different populations: firemen, policemen, taxi drivers. We were going to the schools. We were going to a lot of very remote Mayan villages in the Mayan zone, and what we saw everywhere that we went were very high rates of diabetes and pre-diabetes. And you know, a lot of times, most times, people had no idea that they had the disease, even when their numbers were way out of range. And people even that we were meeting had amputations or had blindness, and they had no idea that those things were being caused by their diabetes. So, you know, I was sort of thrown into this situation where it was just very shocking to me personally. I had no training in medicine or public health, and I wanted to, you know, tell a story to other people about what was happening down there. So that's 2008, and I went back in 2009. And was that when we tell people yours are high and you actually have this chronic disease, they would say to us, "Oh, well, I guess I got the Susto." And we were like, "What?" We were a bunch of Americans, and we were like, we had no idea what they were talking about. So when we understood that they did not get the link between nutrition and the chronic disease that they had, then that's when we started really noticing the diet. And, you know, of course, Coca-Cola was just everywhere in the whole culture. And I mean, I had lived in Mexico in the late 70s, so I don't remember it ever being like that. It would all seem to have happened in the last 10 or 20 years. So when I got back to the States I heard about they passed a soda tax in 2013, and I was thinking, okay, well, that's an interesting story, right? So that they had this horrible thing, this problem, and the country came together and they passed a soda tax and they're addressing the issue. So I thought, well, that might be an interesting subject for a film. And then, of course, I started to do the research and meet people like Dr. Barquera and Dr. Carriedo and kind of piece together a story. And this is the movie that ended up after spending a few years filming interviews and going back down to Mexico. So anyway, that's how the film came about.
Thank you, Karen, for sharing this story. And I'm curious to hear from you. How did you choose the title?
I think the original title of the movie was "Enjoy Diabetes," sort of a takeoff on the Coca-Cola advertising slogan. But we really liked using the Susto topic because it works at a couple of different levels. You can look at Susto as a shock, either to your personal body or you can to the whole culture. So in a way, El Susto is really about the effects of an influx of ultra-processed foods and how it shocked the Mexican food system. So it kind of works both ways, and it's more colorful, and it also speaks to some of the education that needs to be done to bring people to a certain level of understanding about what's causing the disease.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really relevant. I must say that I didn't know about this expression, el susto, but it really gives us a strong impression about the fact that often as health professionals, when we study a disease on a medical textbook, we learn a standardized version of a disease, but then when we talk to the patient, often the patient, let's say, might have a completely different understanding of a certain symptom, of a certain medical condition. And these, of course, have an influence. These have an influence because there might be misunderstanding in the relation between the health worker and the patient. But also from a public health perspective, this can create issues, for example, in implementing health promotion program. So I think that in your movie, Karen, you really managed to show this issue really well. Next to your main goal, that probably was showing how industry interfered with the public health life of the country, you also managed really well to show this other side on folk illness and let's say transcultural medicine. Thank you for that. I will now move to our second speaker, Angela. So Angela, this movie shows us how the soda tax was approved in Mexico, all the obstacles that had to be overcome in order to approve the soda tax. But of course, soda tax is only one of the possible measures to fight the obesity and diabetes epidemic. There are other measures and policies, and I'm wondering if you can tell us more about these other measures and policies that Mexico is applying, or that you think, in your opinion, would have to be applied to reduce the impact of diabetes and obesity, and also about the challenges that have been encountering so far in the implementation phase.
Yeah, thank you. Of course, Simon can jump in if he finds it necessary, but I think, well, since 2010, since Felipe Calderon started in his administration, he tried to have a plan to tackle obesity. But the problem with his proposal was that there were no legally binding measures, or they didn't have budget to do that. So they were successful in implementing some food and physical activity guidance for schools, and they continue to be implemented with a lot of issues in the way and changes in administrations. But with the soda tax and a few other measures came about, front of pack labeling, but it was based on the GDA. That is, it's a system that is based on the industry criteria, and it's not, it hasn't been found to be as effective as other type of front of pack labeling, and also some regulatory measures around marketing to kids. But none of them were completely robust, and they don't, there have been also issues on monitoring this type of policies, because also the industry is very involved, or was very involved until the past administration, in the monitoring system and platforms under the multi-stakeholder approach. So they have a lot of power and a lot of influence in the past administration, so they weren't able to be successful. So I think, I don't know, in this new administration, things are moving forward. Recently this year, with the support of a lot of health advocates and important academics and promoters of food policies in Mexico, like Simon and a lot of other people, the warning label system was approved, and it's legally binding. It's based on evidence, and obviously it has been attacked a lot throughout its implementation, throughout its the agenda setting, and now through the implementation it will be a tough battle, I guess. But I think we still need to make an effort on improving the marketing regulations to kids. We can use a child's rights approach and make them really robust, as many international organizations have suggested, and obviously increasing the tax based on evidence, like to properly increase the rate, and many other initiatives that can accompany these measures, I think. And yeah, that's it. I don't know if I answered the question. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Angela. I want to remind all the participants that it is possible to ask questions to Angela, Simone, and Karen. And there is a Q&A box, so feel free to write your question there. And at the end of in the second part of the webinar, we will ask your questions to our panelists. And Angela, I was thinking that, when I watched the movie for the first time, to me it was obvious, it was really automatic to think about the situation, let's say, of the tobacco industry. So like the influence of the tobacco industry and what has been done to try to reduce their huge economical power and influence. So, for example, in terms of marketing regulation, limiting advertising, in particular in sports events, trying to limit their lobbying activities. What are your thoughts about it? Do you think that also for the food industry, we should somehow try to follow the same example?
Yeah, I think totally. And there have been a lot of papers and research recently around these tactics and how the corporate acts very similar. We have seen it throughout the soda tax implementation and discussion that the industry was really involved in attacking the measure, in trying to lobby, in obviously present all the negative impacts of the measure. And they even had some issues with spyware, as you can see in the movie, to pro-tax promoters and health advocates. And this has been a really huge issue, at least in Mexico, where it has been the norm that the industry is really involved in the policy-making process and has so much power. But I think things are getting better, and we are so more aware of these commercial determinants on health policy making. And I think Mexico experts have learned an enormous lesson. And this time around with the warning labels, I think you can see a lot of differences and how they are really making a huge effort. And we need to congratulate them on protecting the process. They have implemented a lot of different things. For example, there was an open government fora since 2018 with its issues, but it has happened. The new government has been very strict on limiting the participation of the food industry, and academics such as Simone has, they have made calls for academics to sign to ethics compliance and ethics, let's say, guidance. And the new government has a new structure to try to improve transparency and accountability mechanisms throughout the process. So I think we are learning our lessons, and I think we really need to be aware of all the, let's say, collateral things that can happen when the industry is so involved. Like with the soda tax weekend, and you can also see it in the movie, they really try to involve themselves in PPPs and water promotion. And even though the soda tax was there, they still try to keep, their name and their reputation out there with the public, and try to be helping the government in some initiatives like physical activity, research, prices, etc. So I think we are more aware of that, and that's a really good progress, at least in Mexico.
Thank you, Angela. And what I heard from, in particular from, let's say those actors who are against measures like the soda tax, is the fact that the soda tax would hit hard, in particular on those people who are part of the low socioeconomic status group, and that education would be the way. What is your view about it?
Well, I think both things need to be there, and I think the soda tax probably because the let's say the remediation actions of the industry have come with promotions and changing packaging, flavoring, and expanding their portfolio with different type of sugary beverages to confuse the consumers. But I think the whole open discussion and debates helps a lot for people to be more aware of these things, and public health promoters and advocates that have been doing a lot of effort in educating the public on how important it is to take care of themselves, and these shocking campaigns that are illustrated in the movie have been really relevant. So I think it's a combination of both things, to be honest. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Angela. And I would now move to our third panelist, Simone. There would be more time later to discuss again on these points with you, Angela, and also with Karen, based on the questions that we will receive from the public. Simone, so in this moment, we are 4 people in this panel. You are in Mexico, Karen is in the US, Angela in the UK, I am in the Netherlands. 4 different countries, but we are all going through the same health crisis. And now I'm talking about the COVID-19 pandemics. Scientific evidence shows that patients with multiple diseases or certain chronic conditions are more at risk of developing severe complications if affected by COVID-19. To what extent is this true for patients with diabetes? And how about obesity? Can you tell us something about that?
Yes, sure. Thank you for the invitation, Lorenzo, and also thanks to the Global Institute, to the Graduate Institute of Global Health. And just let me tell you that I until recently, I just saw the film Susto, and I think it's a very, very important document for us because it explains very clearly and systematized what we are living in Mexico. So we have a pandemic, but we also have a very important epidemic of obesity and non-communicable chronic diseases. About 100,000 people die every year in Mexico from diabetes and cardiovascular diseases. And obesity, diabetes, high blood pressure have been increasing during the last 18 years. Just from obesity, the increase in morbid obesity in the last 18 years has been 111%. So it's a huge problem. And we know from studying the food environment that it's very related to the high consumption of soda and ultra-processed foods that has been increasing not only in Mexico, but in Latin America and other developing countries. Since transnational companies are moving their markets to these countries, because this is food that is identified as unhealthy and its consumption is reducing in developed countries. So this is the context in which we are. And as you mentioned, ultra-processed foods and obesity have a relation with immune response. Obesity, diabetes, and high blood pressure, all of them create an inflammatory state in the body that doesn't allow the body to respond as well to different challenges such as infections. On the other hand, we also know that poor diets that are high in critical ingredients such as salt, sugar, or fat, and also lack some important micronutrients, also promote this inflammatory state. So we definitely were very worried about this pandemic of COVID since very early. And now we submitted an early report to a journal documenting that as in other countries, in Mexico, there is a higher risk of severity and complications and hospitalizations in a population that is living with overweight, obesity, or diabetes. So we are very concerned. We know this problem is contributing, and we think it needs to be taken very seriously. And now that everybody is talking about health, which is not common, I think we need to be able to communicate this message of the importance of having healthy lifestyles and healthy diets. And I think El Susto will be very important to explain to people, to decision makers, policy makers, what is the relation between diet and health.
Thank you, Simone. Yeah, indeed. I agree, and I believe that this pandemic is really showing us how everything is interconnected. Infectious disease control and non-communicable diseases are not two separate words. And the health of the population does not depend just on having access to modern cutting-edge hospital, but to the life condition, to the environment in which we live. And this also means having the opportunity to having access to healthy food, first of all. This plays a very important role. And also you mentioned the fact that this movie, you think, might be used to convey a strong message about the importance of the commercial determinants of health. And this gives me the opportunity to jump to the next question, which is about the role of a civil society. So this movie, I think, show us really the power of a civil society, the power of the voice of a civil society. And again, talking about obesity, diabetes, and health policies, what are, in your opinion, the current and future challenges for the civil society, and what are the next steps to promote positive change?
Yes, well, I think civil society in all the world has the huge challenge of getting funding for their activities. So this is a difficult component. And I think the Mexican civil society that has been involved in these policy actions, such as El Poder, La Alianza, Contrapeso, have been able to obtain funding to promote their agenda, and this is an important component. But I need to recognize that without them, it will be impossible to achieve this kind of results. They were very professional. They had a lot of experience. Many of them came from other civil society organizations dealing with environment or tobacco. So they are basically experts from civil society, and they had a very smart media strategy and communication strategy. And I think one of the advantages of these days we are living is that the social media and the social networks are not as expensive if you are creative enough to promote ideas. So they have been able to dominate in social media, even though food industry is dominating the formal media, advertising on TV or newspapers. You can see in social media the traction of civil society. So I think this is This is very important. And the other important thing is that Latin America as a region is very connected. We share the common language and a lot of cultural connections. So the progress is from research and from civil society is coming from all these countries interconnected, living the same problems and having this almost the same level of development and on the same lack of resources to solve these problems like the developed countries are doing. So this connection is doing a very good synergistic effect in terms of being creative about what policies can we implement or what campaigns, how to connect academia with decision makers and civil society, and also how to create a culture in which interference of industry is not appropriate, which is something new in these countries. And as you can see from the current film, this is not this interference is not only in developing countries. This interference is in all the world, and we are very lucky that we were able to do something, because there are many countries with much more resources than us that have not been able to do a lot about it, because there is a very powerful sector, and so this is something that I think the rest of the world needs to learn how to organize, and civil society is a key component.
Yeah, definitely. The movie is set in Mexico, but we are talking about a global problem. Let's remember, cardiovascular diseases are the first cause of death in the world, and diabetes is a very important, is a condition that represents a very important risk factor for cardiovascular death. And when I was watching a movie, I remember. So now you talked about the interference of the industry, and of course this let's say happens often in the backstage of policy making, but also I think on a more subtle level in the life of all of us. In the movie, there is a part in which you show us how a big soda company advertised, and it's basically the sponsor of the vegetables and fruit section in a supermarket. And this is something that goes unnoticed often, because it became so much as part of our everyday normality. I went to the supermarket yesterday, and I remember that I found sodas in 4 different parts of the supermarket: at the entrance, in the soda section, by the checkouts. So it's really somehow part of a marketing strategy, and it's just somehow really easy to accept it as normality. But looking at the consequences of on the health of the population, I guess we should conclude that this should not be accepted as a normality. And I think that the role of the civil society starts from indeed raising awareness on an issue. And I also believe that this documentary can play an important role. So I hope it will be seen by many people. And I think we can now move to the question from our audience. And let's see, we have received a few questions. I will start by reading the first question. So, I'm wondering what evidence exists regarding the impact of this tax on consumers. Does a 10% increase actually reduce consumption? How can we know the reduction in consumption of sugary beverage is related to the tax and not to other public health measures? Is this question you want to address, Angela?
Well, to date we have several, like a few studies that have evaluated the impact of the soda tax, and all of them have, shown that there has been an important decrease in consumption. All of them have been free from conflict of interest. So it has to do with obviously with the price, but and obviously this is based on national nutrition surveys and the let's say the big surveys around sales, and so it has decreased. Obviously, we have had also some research that has been sponsored by the industry, which frame differently the results and use different measures that are not always well adjusted, that diminish the results or try to minimize what they really are. And that's important to notice as well. But obviously, it's a combination of things, because it's not like you're in a laboratory that you can, and a public health intervention of this size needs a lot of detail to try to monitor it and evaluate it properly. And I think the group behind that is very powerful, and really a lot of experts have done it from the National Institute of Public Health, have found an important reduction. Obviously, with modeling studies, it has been found that the ideal at least would be 20% to see like a very relevant reduction and to have an impact on obesity in shorter time than expected. But obviously, it's hard to set the target so high. But I think, yes, they do have had impact on consumption.
Yeah, thank you, Angela. I think somehow you also already addressed the second question that was a bit related to this topic. So how much time would it take to see the results of soda tax in concretely reducing obesity and type 2 diabetes incidence? But I also take this chance to ask Simone if there is anything you want to add related to both these first two questions.
Yes, well, I agree with Angela in what she mentioned. There is very good studies published in high impact factor journals showing the effects of the soda tax in Mexico. We estimate that about in the first year, the reduction in soda consumption was equivalent to reducing about 62,000 tons of sugar from the diet. So this is this kind of policies is impossible to have this kind of results with 1 year of promotion of stop drinking soda. It was very important, but I would like to mention some other thing. The soda tax is only a part of what we think is multi-intervention, a kit of interventions that we need to control and improve the diets and the food environment in Mexico. So it doesn't make much sense to think isolated in the soda tax and their effect in the rates of obesity. It's a measure to improve the food environment, needs to be increased and needs to be implemented together with other measures such as the front of pack labeling, breastfeeding strategies that can raise the rates of breastfeeding in Mexico, which is a huge problem. Also, improving the food environment at schools and at the communities' water availability, stopping marketing directed to children, which is huge in Mexico, as in most countries. So there is a lot of this debate from industry saying, okay, show me that the tax is doing effect on preventing obesity, and if not, that means that it's not working and you should take it out. And it doesn't make any sense to get into this debate. I will say, if if the results are not big enough, then we need to increase it. And obviously we are not expecting by itself will curb the obesity. Obviously there are modeling studies, one that was published just this month, proving that in the modeling, the soda tax will have effect on body mass index in the population, but it's small, obviously.
Yeah, yeah, and indeed, somehow this was a courageous measure, I would say. Often, yeah, for politicians is, how can I say, difficult to take decisions who might be unpopular and decision of which you wouldn't see a result, that would not show a result in short time. One of the issues, I guess, for government is trying to implement measures that shows positive results in a short time. But here we are talking about something that yeah, might need time before showing an effect. But I would now move to the next question, that is about the role of PAHO and WHO. So has any resolution been adopted at the PAHO or WHO regarding soda? And
well,
yeah, Simone.
Well, just briefly, there are many important resolutions coming from PAHO, from the regional office of WHO that are supporting our strategies. For example, they have a report on marketing directed to children and a set of recommendations that we are using as a country, and most countries are using them. Also, they created a profile of ultra-processed foods that helps the countries to define what is healthy or unhealthy. And this is very important because most of the profiles available in the world are created by food industry. And then other part that I think is very important is the WHO Nutrition Manifesto, in which they also speak about the importance of reformulation and improving food environments, but very specifically of avoiding and trying to protect these policies from industry interference. So I think we have a very good set of tools from international agencies that can help us to guide and support the policies, and are also very important for policymakers, because when you tell them this is the consensus of a group of academics from the country, sometimes they think, well, maybe they are wrong. But if you say this is also supported by an international health organization from United Nations, then it gives a lot of weight to the ideas.
Thank you, Simone. And I have a question for Karen. So a lot of people want to see this movie, and we have people asking about plans for future distribution of the film. So you already mentioned at the beginning about that you are planning a premiere in Mexico. Is there anything else that you want to share with us and our audience?
Well, obviously, because of the current pandemic and all of the film festivals being closed and all the movie theaters being closed, we've had to switch our plans a bit. So the current plan is to have the film available for community organizations, educational institutions, to do some private screenings for the next few months online. And at some point, we will put our film up on the internet for people to be able to stream it digitally. It should be up for pre-sale maybe in June, and we'll release it over the coming months. We're just finishing our Spanish language version, And we're waiting to finish that before we would make it available. We'd like for it to be available in Mexico and for Spanish-speaking countries at the same time as the English-speaking countries. So we're sort of working on that right now. But we'll have something available online in, maybe late summer. We're doing quite a number of group screenings right now, even digitally, where we have an organization sponsor a screening and then do a Zoom call afterwards for local activists or health promoters to discuss the film and how they can use it in their own community. And I would like to see a lot of that happening to figure out how different people can use the film for their own local, not just soda tax, but a lot of people in the US, for example, are working on kids' menu restrictions and just general health campaigns. So we'd like for those people to have a look at it first and then to figure out how they can maximize the impact of the film in their own communities.
Thank you, Karen. One of the dramatic things we see in the documentary is the fact that in certain communities, in particular when there is poor access to clean water, sodas are given by mothers to children, or in general are given to children as an alternative to water. And here we have a question that is about the diffusion of sodas among the indigenous community. In particular, we have a person writing from Buenos Aires that tells us that Coca-Cola and other ultra-processed products are integrated in popular religious ceremony, and this gives them a high symbolic value. How do you think that the situation could be normalized? I don't know, Angela, is this something you want to speak to?
Yeah, I can answer that. Well, yes, it's a big problem, the water availability in our country, and it has also come as a huge topic now with COVID, obviously, because the basic recommendations of keep washing your hands is just impossible, right? So it's really an issue in the country, and we are doing some research around that, not only because obviously it's so that it's very ingrained in the culture of some communities, but also I think they are starting to notice that it's not correct. At least we have seen that people from the south are more like Chiapas and all this country are being more aware of how much the corporations have penetrated their culture, and with all this happening. And obviously in the north is completely different because obviously the main bottle and distributor of Coca-Cola is in the north, and they have done a lot of work on infrastructure around water availability in a lot of states, and they have a huge recognition and a lot of partnerships with the local authorities. So it's a big problem, and I think in relation to culture, I think it's still a lot of work to be done. There has been a lot of research from social sciences and stuff to try to understand how they have influenced the local culture. But I think this is getting better. At least we have an example that a few years ago they tried, just after the tax, there was a huge advertising campaign using all these communities and obviously promoting how they do some social work with them. And I think with the civil society groups that Simon was mentioning, they were really vocal about these issues of keeping their marketing tactics with vulnerable populations. So I think it's getting better, but still there's a lot of work to be done on this area.
Thank you, Angela. Two questions about the role of the government. And I want to ask, I will ask this question to Simone, but anyone feel free to add your opinion. How much of the success was health related or due to the financial challenges of the Mexican government? And is the tax earmarked? And then one more on a similar topic. Does the Mexican trade agreement with the US somehow limit the action of the Mexican government to protect public health? What is your opinion, Simone?
Well, talking about the tax, the tax in Mexico was not earmarked. It was promoted as something that will help to implement some health policies, and that help the promoters to gain support from the population. At the end, the problem, and this is also very common in Latin America, is that the government doesn't have enough revenue. And we are a country that is, we are an oil producer country, and the oil was also in record low prices, well, without counting now. And so they used the revenue to all the actions of the government, and that is something that we would love to have at least a part earmarked to public health measurements, because there is a very low investment in public health that has been decreasing over the years. So this is one point in which civil society is working a lot, and we in academia are also showing decision makers that investing in public health is not only because we love health and we want to have health. Investing in public health has greater returns than many other things that they think are more important. So there is a lot of evidence on how you can promote well-being and economic growth investing in health, and we are working on that. And the other one, the other comment about, it was about other measurements implemented in the country.
Yeah, so it was about, let me look at the question again. So yeah,
it was if all the other US has the trade agreements limit the policy interventions.
The action of the government.
Yes, transnational companies have implemented these strategies. So they have mobilized letters from politicians in the US and different attempts to in the negotiation of the North America Free Trade Agreement to stop some of the policy attempts, such as soda tax, some marketing controls, etc. Until now, they have not been successful, and there is a lot of resources and research from the areas of litigation that support the notion that governments are independent and can give priority to health when there are debates on trade. So it's complex, but it's something in which we definitely think, at least with this government, is going to be in favor of health.
Thank you, Simone. We are running out of time, but I'll try to squeeze in the last couple of questions. And one is about the situation in the UK. So question for Angela. Let me find it. So in the UK, they have implemented such tax last year, I guess. Do we have some impact analysis from its implementation on curbing the practice and sell?
Yeah, there's been research. There are two groups mainly looking at the impact of the UK tax at the moment. One is at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, and a big group also in Cambridge University. They have come with at least two publications that it has had an impact. Obviously, it's a different tax. It's a levy, so it's different. I mean, it depends on the amount of sugar a beverage has, and I think it has also had an important effect on reformulation. That's important, but also risky if we go into details. But yeah, there are some results already, so you can find them. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Angela. And before we mention the issue of lack of access to safe drinking water, and the audience is asking if you know if there are plans to address this issue. Angela, or Simone, or Karen.
Yes, sorry, go ahead. Well, there is, as Angela was mentioning before, this is a huge problem in different areas of Mexico. A big part of the territory is very dry. It's almost like desert. And we have many isolated small areas in which it's very expensive to bring water. So this is a structural problem that is going to take years, but definitely the government needs to invest in this kind of situations, particularly in places in which soda industry has been targeting consumption of soda, like the south of Mexico. South of Mexico is one of the richest parts in water availability in our country. And the sad part is that there is not infrastructure because there has not been investment. So the consumption of soda is the way in which people is hydrating. So this is something that is advancing, but we need to work a lot, and this is going to take more than one administration to be solved.
Thank you, Simone. Last question. Well, it's actually for me, but we are all free to add our opinion, of course. How should we change the undergraduate medical education to take into account El Susto and not just diabetes? In other words, how do we ensure that the future medical professional acquire the needed competencies to adequately deal with the community? Well, I think yeah, it's really important to adapt medical curricula to yeah, and including transcultural models on transcultural education, transcultural medicine, that would allow the students to have let's say a deeper understanding of a disease. As I said before, we study medical condition based on like medical textbooks that are generally results of research conducted in Western countries. We study a very standardized version of the epidemiology, of the risk factors, of the therapies. But it's important for the students definitely to understand that there are different ways to understand certain symptoms and diseases, and also that there are different epidemiology, different risk factors when we look at different social groups. So it's of course not possible to study all these differences all over the world, but it's important to add this element in the education. But this is something that can also be done in a, let's say, transversal way, and including these in topics that are already taught, but also including models on global health, I think would be a good, like a positive achievement for medical schools, and many are already doing that. And by saying this, I would thank all the participants. Yeah, actually, it's time for me to give the microphone back to Meg, but before, I want to thank our panelists, so Karen Atkins, Simon Barquera, and Angela Carriedo. I want to thank you for your time and for your contribution to this event. I want to thank the Graduate Institute, and in particular Meg Davis, Nina Bianchi, and Sachio Yagi for the technical support, and Sueri Moon. Thank you all for making this event possible. And thanks to my colleagues at Saluteglobale.it, Benedetta, Bibi, Luca, Eduardo, and all the others for your contribution in our work. And Meg, the floor is yours.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lorenzo and Salute Globale. It was a fantastic proposal, fantastic event, very informative. Thank you so much to our panelists. We've had a lot of interest in this, and of course, we would encourage everyone who's interested in the film to go to elsustomovie.com to see more about future screenings and get on their mailing list. We will share all of the questions we didn't get to answer with the panelists, and so we hope we can continue the conversation with everyone on Twitter. So please tag us. You can see our tag there on the slide, or hashtag WHA Week, so we can continue to discuss and learn about this really important issue and learn from the Mexican experience. So our WHA Week of events continues tomorrow with a very exciting event on the transparency resolution at WHO last year and what's happened since then, a joint event with OT Meds, which will be moderated by Suri Moon. And then we have an event on the female healthcare workforce on Friday, and an event on UHC 2030. So please join our mailing list, follow us on social media, and we hope to see you for this continued discussion in the days to come. Thanks so much, and goodbye.